Hey guys, I'm Melissa, and this is Murder She Crocheted, the podcast where we untangle dark truths, sometimes one thread at a time. So before we start today, I just want to apologize. I've been MIA for the last couple weeks. A couple of you guys who know me know that I have a 15-month-old little girl who is my pride and joy, but she got pneumonia, and it was kind of a fight with her medical care team. I've been dealing with that, and I thought that I had pre-recorded enough bulk content, and obviously I did not. So I'm sorry. I'm going to do better, more bulk recording in the future to avoid that happening. So yeah, sorry. She is on the mend and getting better and is less grumpy. If you guys have kids or have been around kids, they are feral, especially mine. Mine is as feral as they come. So that being said, I apologize for not having enough bulk recorded. If you can tell, I'm recording somewhere new. I am in my office. It is the quietest place. I have a baby. We've established that. I also live on a military installation, and they are constantly doing field artillery stuff and the boom and the bang and the rattle. So it's not a conducive place to film quietly, especially because I live on the side of the base that's closest to that. And then I was also MIA for a whole week for telecommunicator week, which if you're a dispatcher, I'm with you. I got you. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so let's just get into this. If you see me looking a little off this way, it's because my notes are right behind the camera. I promise I'm not ignoring you. I just have to make notes because my brain will take me over here and I'll have a squirrel moment. So I have to follow the notes. Or this would be a 7-hour podcast and nobody wants that. So today we are deep diving into one of the most unsettling cult stories that I've ever come across, honestly. It's a case that seems kind of absurd at first. It's colorful and bizarre and almost laughable. Until it isn't. This is the story of the Buddhafield Cult and its leader, Jaime Gomez, if that's what you want to call him. He has a million names, but we'll get into that. Spoiler alert, it is a lot darker than a bunch of hippies chanting under the California sun. So grab your yarn, get a comfy spot, and let's get started. Before we get into the case, let's check in on our crochet pattern. I think I'm going to start calling it our crime skein, kind of like skein. I don't know. You guys tell me what you think about that. Is it cheesy? I feel like it's kind of cheesy, but I'm kind of cheesy, so I am going to make a variation of this. This one hasn't been blocked yet, so ignore it. I'm a Stanley girl or a Tumblr girl. I don't have a lot of brand names. If my job had not bought me a brand name Stanley, I wouldn't have a brand name Stanley. So I'm going to make these. They're very easy. I will give you a link to, I guess, just a Google Doc on how I type it up. But the top can be any granny square you want it to be. So if you want a heart granny square, which is what we're making today, you can do that. If you want the sunburst or the sunflower granny square that we made in episode 1, I made my sister one that's a circle granny square, and I put Jack the Pumpkin King's face on the circle. So it's super easy. You make 2 of those, and then we'll join them together and go down the length of the cup. What I like about making it out of granny squares and kind of just joining and crocheting down is it'll fit any tumbler. I know that some people don't like the ones with the handles and the straw, so you can make it for a long skinny tumbler, or a 30 ounce versus a 40 ounce, or the little short coffee tumblers. Whatever floats your boat, you can make it to fit. I need to retract a previous statement. I said if my job didn't buy me a brand name Stanley, I wouldn't have one. Flag on the play. Except for the one I bought myself, which is the Alphaba Stanley, because we stan Alphaba. Okay, I'm done rambling. I use a 5mm crochet hook for this, and either worsted weight or cotton yarn. A lot of things that you should use cotton for, I use worsted weight for. You guys will notice that I am a worsted weight girly. But that being said, we are going to go ahead and get into it, I think. I think we're ready to get into it. Make sure that you tag me in the pictures of the things that you make, because you know I want to see them. I'm on everything, all of the social medias. They're in the show notes, in the bios. I want to see it, so tag me, okay? All right, so with yarn in hand, let's begin. When it comes to cult leaders, Jaime Gomez, also known as Andreas or Michel, sometimes even teacher, or Reiji, which means God King, he was benign at first. Maybe even laughable, like I said earlier. It just, you know, he wasn't anything special, but he kind of caught some glances, right? Picture a ballet dancer with a Ken doll body, a tendency to wear Speedos and eyeliner, and his biggest claim to fame was being a non-speaking extra in Rosemary's Baby. He was miles away from the likes of Jim Jones or Charles Manson. On the outside, on the surface, the Buddhafield Cult, or Buddhafield, they deny their cult activity, but we'll get to that later. So on the surface, it seemed like a normal, typical 80s hippie commune. Imagine watered down Eastern spirituality, yoga in the sun, group sing-alongs, but as we know with cults, what's on the surface is never the full picture, and it certainly wasn't here either. Buddhafield is classified as a new religious movement, and it started in the 80s in Hollywood, California, and yes, it is actually still operating today in Hawaii. These days, they often are recruiting from places like yoga studios or the beach. Former members, though, have been pretty open about calling it what it is, and that's a cult. If you want a visual to go today's story, check out the documentary Holy Hell. It's incredibly informative, and it was made by a former member. I am going to reference it a lot throughout this video and the former member who made it, but we'll talk about the documentary itself later. I do want to tell you that it is on Amazon Prime, and I have watched it twice. It's pretty good. So to start talking about the cult, we have to start talking about the leader, Jaime Gomez. He, like I said, used different names like Andreas or Michel, teacher, Reiji. For clarity's sake today, I'm going to stick with the name that he was born with, Jaime Gomez. He was born to a Venezuelan farmer. I couldn't find a whole lot about his early life. I just know that his Venezuelan father was very wealthy, and he ended up moving to the U.S. chasing fame. He wanted to be a movie star. He wanted to be in Hollywood. You know, it's the same dream always, right? When he got to Hollywood, he did not find the fame he was seeking. He is credited with a non-speaking role in Rosemary's Baby from 1968. It is on IMDb. And listen, if you think that it's ironic that a man who would go on later to lead his own cult is appearing in a movie about a satanic cult, you're not alone. Alexa, play Ironic by Alanis Morissette. So when acting didn't pan out, Gomez turned to ballet. He allegedly starred in the Oakland Ballet for a while. And when that didn't take off, again, he took another detour into, I guess, the next best thing, adult entertainment. Now, I need to preface this by saying there is nothing wrong with being in adult entertainment. Get your bag. There is no judgment on my end. I think that the longer you guys stick around, the more you'll realize that this is a safe space, and I'm not judging you for nothing. But it's funny to me, and that's why I'm laughing, that I mean, he went from acting to ballet, and his next logical step in this whole thing was porn. Which, I mean, whatever. Get your bag. Some days I look at my sad little bank account and say, you know what? I am in the wrong line of work here. So Gomez was known for his distinctive appearance. He was chiseled, but always in a tight-fitting Speedo and eyeliner. It was a character. He was described by a lot of people as chiseled charlatan, and honestly, it kind of fits. So before we get too far into the story itself, I want to tell you about Will Allen. Will Allen is the former member that made the documentary. He was 22 in 1985 when his mother found out that he was gay and kicked him out of the house. His sister invited him to join a local alternative community meditation group, which ended up being Buddhafield. You may hear me say Buddhafield. My brain doesn't know which one it wants to go with. I don't know what I would do if my sister recruited me into a cult, but Christmases would be awkward afterwards for sure. So at the time, Gomez was going by Michel Rostand, and Allen was vulnerable. And because he was a film school graduate, he ended up becoming the group's documentarian, or as Gomez referred to him, the propaganda minister. Okay, so Allen later told NPR about his indoctrination into the cult, saying, quote, "It was very slow and methodical. It was nothing, again, like the frog being boiled. You didn't see it coming. It was a slow seduction. He was a predator. He would use his spiritual teachings to confuse people to go against their normal grain," end quote. Allen eventually left the group in 2007 after 22 years. Can you imagine leaving something after 22 years? He went through a crisis when he left, feeling completely directionless and alone, and somehow ended up at the Sundance Film Festival. That's where he found a new community. After watching the movie Keep the Lights On, he realized he wanted to tell his own story. And that, you guys, is how Holy Hell came to be. Which, like I said, y'all, you gotta watch it. It will explain so much more than I can in a 30, 45-minute podcast. Now, we know who two of the key players are. Let's get into the beliefs and practices and allegations, of which there are many. Buddha pushed New Age ideas. Gomez had convinced his followers that he was divine and encouraged them to see themselves that way too. Many met him at a weekly yoga meditation, and he led weekend outings at rivers and mountaintops and rocky beaches and all of the places where you could frolic and meditate and get in touch with your inner child. At first, it really did seem like a lot of fun. A former member, Alessandra Burinen, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that, said, quote, "There was this really hot guy, and that's all it took to hook me. The spiritual stuff came later." Which, if you do any research into cults, you know that's how that works, right? They hook you with something fun, like a hot guy, first, and then go into the other stuff. Another former member, Philippe Coquet and Vera Sheffo, I'm so sorry, told Esquire how they fell into the cult. Coquet saying, I was dissatisfied with all my friends who were drunk and drugged all the time, including me, and I met this young man who was very beautiful, and I felt very taken by him. He invited me to a meeting. It felt like a really loving, sweet, beautiful family, and I got really high in the environment that I was in. I went home and I was like, wow, I didn't even have to get high to get high. Then Vera said, at first she thought Gomez was, quote, friggin' weird, wearing his little Speedos and tiny vest, but she left their first meeting feeling high without drugs. I don't want to paint this out like all these people were just trying to get high. Y'all, this was the 80s. Everybody was high. So many of the followers left their jobs, gave up their personal lives, and devoted everything to the roughly 100-member group. And for over 2 decades, they loved it. They felt this community and this sense of belonging and couldn't get enough. So central to Buddhafield's beliefs was the practice of Shakti. There you go. I practiced how to pronounce these things beforehand, y'all. You just can't tell. This was a supposed transfer of power from Gomez to his followers using just his finger. He used the Sanskrit word Shakti because it means power. He often cited Middle Eastern and Indian teachings to justify his practices. Followers were promised salvation through weekly meditations and therapy sessions called cleansings, which they had to pay $50 each for. Gomez claimed he had a direct connection to God, which he called the knowing. So these sessions were private, hypnotic, and Gomez had a disturbingly calming voice. But male members later kind of started to realize that those sessions were a front for sexual exploitation. Followers were required to remain celibate, although Gomez had allegedly had sexual relations with many of them. Drugs and alcohol were strictly prohibited. Members endured intense routines, including 3 to 5 hour ballet sessions a day, y'all, multiple times a week for performances, and those performances nobody outside the cult would ever see. So more or less, Gomez was standing there saying, "Dance, monkey, dance," and it was insane. Many of them even missed or quit their jobs to go to these practices. They also couldn't have any pets, which, red flag, y'all. I'm a dog girly. Who doesn't like pets? They were also encouraged to undergo plastic surgery. What? Women were told to have abortions because, quote, children and personal enlightenment don't mix, end quote. And they followed a strict diet. No sugar, no gluten, no fun. Some followers had special roles like carrying Gomez's chair or a portable throne, or body workers that provided massages on command. Will Allen also said he even had to tuck Gomez in every night. The only person I'm tucking in every night, y'all, is my child. So members' identities and egos were stripped away. They were given new names, pretty much new identities. The group's focus shifted over the years. Instead of delving into themselves for enlightenment, members of the Buddhafield were encouraged to worship their guru. One acolyte, Julian Goldstein, showed his devotion by carving elaborate fruit salads. In the documentary, he talks about how he just had this need to find some way to be able to serve Gomez, or the teacher. And he said, "What can I do?" And Gomez told him fruit or fruit salads. And he goes on to tell about how he put everything he could into these fruit salads. He made them elaborate and beautiful and, really put his soul into this work, only for Gomez to not eat them. They ended up getting thrown away every day. And one day he walked in and saw them being thrown away, and he describes the feeling of just how much it crushed him. But he continued to do it because he felt like that was not the only, but one of the ways that he could serve his leader, which is just heartbreaking. Can you imagine your child or somebody that you love, putting all of this work into something to give you, and then you just throw it away? That's heartbreaking. I don't know. I'm probably just being emotional about it. I've been super in my feels last couple days. Anyway, I'm rambling. So in the Holy Hell documentary, Will Allen explained, quote, a lot of principles of the East versus West that we were doing, like surrendering to the guru, dropping your ego, taking your shoes off before you walk into a room and leave the world behind. We didn't think of it as giving our power. We thought of it as empowering, end quote. However, underneath the surface, troubling allegations started to emerge. Gomez faced numerous accusations of sexual abuse, especially towards his male followers. Victims reported confessions that were made during the weekly hypnotherapy sessions, the ones he charged them for. They were later used against them, kind of creating an atmosphere of control and fear. Gomez also exploited the AIDS crisis to instill fear into his gay followers, holding that over them, right? Using their vulnerability to tighten his hold. And don't get me started on the AIDS crisis. My grandmother was a nurse during all of that, and she was a bad woman, the bad bitch. And I'll tell you that story later if you want to hear it. So Gomez also manipulated his followers in other ways. He would guilt them into telling him things that other members are doing or saying, kind of like a tattletale. Vera, one of the members we talked about earlier, said, quote, also, since we all live together, he'd ask you questions about someone else, and he would say, if you don't tell me that, then you are creating karma, so you need to tell me what the person is doing so I can help them, end quote. He used manipulation when it came to sex also. Now, I do want to just put in a trigger warning right now. We're going to talk about some sexual abuse, not in detail, but it's not great. So another former cult member said, when I suggested that I didn't want to have sex with him anymore, his answer to me was, well, maybe you don't need to be here anymore. Maybe you've outgrown this. And that's like being threatened with excommunication. I didn't want to pay that price. What would I do? Where would I go? End quote. So this is part of that cult mentality, right? He's made them dependent on him, and now he is exploiting that dependence to get what he wants, which is disgusting. So the knowing that everybody wanted to achieve, that ultimate enlightenment, turned out to be a hoax too. It was described as something similar to an LSD trip, right? Colors swirl, trees sway, and divinity presented itself, and all of the fun things. And I'm sure that you're probably thinking he drugged them, because that sounds like something a cult leader would do, but no. Gomez actually used an ancient Hindu technique by pressing his fingers into the recipient's eyes in such a way that intense light would form. In essence, he was squeezing their eyeballs. The effect, if it wasn't effective, Gomez claimed that the person just wasn't spiritually prepared to receive the knowing, which, as you can expect, was upsetting, because that was the ultimate goal of his followers, right? Coquet goes along to say, quote, when I was actually revealed the knowing, I was screaming bloody murder. It was so painful to me, and everything in me was saying, leave, get out of the house, end quote. Imagine wanting to achieve enlightenment or whatever it is the cult is selling so badly, and then it just turns out to be a dude in a bikini gouging your eyeballs out. So as the years passed, male followers started to realize that those cleansing sessions were rape disguised as spiritual practice. The teacher's manipulation only worsened as fleeing members were told that they would die without his paternal support. An ex-follower says in the Holy Hell documentary, it got to the point where I didn't care. I might be dead in a year, but it's better than being here for another second. The thing that gets me about that is these people were so brainwashed into being so reliant on this cult and the cult leader, and then you have them talking about how they wanted out so badly once their eyeballs were opened. And I just, it's insane to me about like how fast they understood it once the wool was taken over theirs. I don't know. The human brain fascinates me. But anyway, I'm rambling again. Former members like Chris Johnston or Julian Goldstein, Radhia Glace, I'm so sorry, and Alessandro Bierinen that we talked about earlier have publicly claimed that they were brainwashed by Jaime Gomez. Along the way, they say that they lost their spiritual innocence, their identities, and even their ability to make decisions for themselves. Many describe being isolated from outside information. For example, Gomez bristled when another member bought a TV. A TV! Followers were actively discouraged from accessing outside media that might challenge Gomez's authority over the group beliefs. And if you guys are into cults or have listened about cults for any amount of time, you know that this is textbook cult behavior. Now, this part is going to get a little graphic. Skip ahead, trigger warning for sexual abuse. Will Allen tells about his abuse in something called the box. Allen would have to get ready to have sex with the guru while the rest of the members were singing. Gomez called it a ritual, and Gomez would sit in a chair with Allen kneeling in front of him. He would pleasure himself to explicit content, and Allen says, quote, "Then I would come in and be the finishing person," end quote. Gomez would tell someone to get the box, and then Gomez would stand on the box to get to the right height, and then Gomez would use Allen's body to reach a climax, which we're going to call that what it is, and that is rape. I need to say this, because a lot of times people think in cults or in these situations, well, Will Allen was willing. I mean, he got down and prepared for it, but absolutely not. Any type of coercion or manipulation automatically negates consent. Automatically negates consent. And I need that to be very loud and clear while we talk about this. So, like I said, the box was what Gomez would have to use to make up for the height difference between his shorter stature and Allen's taller one. Allen went through this for 4.5 years. He says, quote, "I didn't register as abuse. I just thought, it's my problem. Why am I not surrendered? I didn't ever know what was happening to me. And then I just had to love him like he was my guru. I had to honor and respect him as my guru. And that's when I started hating him. I had PTSD without even knowing it," end quote. Despite the mounting allegations, Gomez has consistently denied any wrongdoings and has shunned his ex-followers who spoke out against him. Of course he did. Moving on. While the cult started in the 1980s in Hollywood, the Buddhafield had caught the attention of cult watcher Rick Ross by the early 1990s. So the guru simply packed up and left in the middle of the night, checking out the legendary vortexes of Sedona, Arizona, before ultimately relocating to Austin, Texas in 1992. This is when the guru, who had been going by Michel, changed his name to Andreas. One day, he took his mass of followers to Barton Springs. If you are from Austin, then you know. They all lined up and listened to Gomez, who was sporting his tight-fitting Speedo and black eyeliner, as he told them to jump in. They all jumped in without questioning, and onlookers reported being unsettled, which I don't blame them. I would also be unsettled. While in Austin, the cult built the One World Theater by hand, and it's still standing today. The venue, however, does not advertise any affiliation with that group. In 1993, Gomez started to change his mind about Texas. Does anybody have any idea why someone would change their thought process about having a cult in Texas in 1993? I'll tell you. Just up the way in Waco, Texas, anybody getting there? Shit hit the fan, and I mean full speed. I am referencing the Waco siege, of course, where multiple federal and state agencies raided a compound where the Branch Davidians lived with their leader, David Koresh. that is also an absolutely insane story. So let me know if you want to hear that one. I actually know a retired Texas Ranger who was involved with all of that, so we could probably get some pretty cool insight. After Waco happened, Gomez started to get paranoid, obviously. Will Allen says that Gomez voiced those feelings to him, and he can pinpoint where that paranoia began. He changed his name, like I said, from Michel to Andreas, and began creating a new character for himself. The end of Buddhafield, as Allen and others knew it, began with an email in 2006. The group had been in Austin for about a decade when this member had left the cult a decade earlier, but returned as a nostalgic apostate. When he returned, what he saw disgusted him, and he knew he wanted out for good. He was going to let everybody know why also on his way out, which ended up being obviously the pervasive psychological and sexual abuse that he witnessed. He wrote an email, and in this email he accused the guru of using hypnotherapy techniques just to plant suggestions during the weekly cleansing sessions that all of the members had to go through. He accused him of improper sexual relationships with some of his closest male followers. Quote, he used sex with his disciples as a spiritual gift, spiritual growth, and a path to further enlightenment. He manipulated people to feel that if they didn't take his sexual step, that they weren't devoted to God and his work. His ability to control people's psyches was unsurpassed, end quote. The Master's message was no longer about connecting with God. It was about connecting with the Master. The songs ceased to be about God anymore, and they were all about the Master. The events, the homemade movies, the ballet, as well as the vibrations inside of them were no longer about God. They were about the Master. Instead of connecting to God's love, it was connect to my love. I think that says it all. Now, Gomez left his followers for about 6 months in 2007 to find another new location for the cult. They were still in Texas at this time. Gomez also began to undergo increasing amounts of plastic surgery around this time and increased his recommendations to his female followers to undergo similar procedures. He also attempted to get followers to report on each other even more about their perceived transgressions. He tightened his hold also. He kept one member from seeing her father before he died and encouraged another to get an abortion, claiming religious reasons again. With his cult starting to crumble, Gomez fled to Hawaii and lost a handful of most of his loyal supporters. Once he made it to Hawaii and started a new following with his most loyal members, I guess you would say, he started the whole show over again. This time, though, the cleansing sessions were $100 each, making sure that his financial and personal needs were secured. Now, I've referenced it quite a few times, but let's get into the documentary, Holy Hell, just a little bit. It provides an insider perspective on Buddhafield and was backed by Jared Leto, which is kind of cool. Allen, like I said, served as the group's videographer for 22 years, and he had archives of footage and interviews with former members and all of that, and he used it to depict the group's evolution and controversies. Allen ended up having to leave most of his footage when he left the group, but he still actually had about 35 hours of edited footage of Buddhafield. Cinematographer Polly Morgan helped shoot new footage of Gomez and his followers in Hawaii. She had to hide in bushes. It was crazy. She said the greatest challenge in shooting the documentary was actually getting the footage. The production also filmed interviews with former members of the cult. The film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and was later broadcast on CNN. And I smile when I say the film festival because that's where this idea started for him. And I'm happy for him. So when asked about the documentary, Gomez said, quote, "It is heartbreaking to see how history has been rewritten. Holy Hell is not a documentary. Rather, it is a work of fiction designed to create drama, fear, and persecution. That is what sells. I am saddened by this attempt to obscure the message of universal love and spiritual awakening. It is devastating to see these friends who were once so filled with love for the world become so angry. I wish them only the best and hold each one close to my heart. If any of my actions were a catalyst for their disharmony, I am truly sorry. May all beings find peace. Michel," end quote. Which be so for real. Be so for real. Anyway, current cult members are adamant about Buddhafield not being a cult. They were outraged by the documentary and frequently chastised Alan for creating it. Sorry, I skipped a stitch. Supporters of the guru argue that he is harmless. Gentry Petzold, who says his relationship with the guru is cordial, eye roll, says that the former members featured in Holy Hell seem to suffer from a bad case of buyer's remorse. Any sexual contact, the guru supporters say, was consensual and came within the context of long-term relationships, which I don't buy that. And it isn't happening now, allegedly. Martin Doltz, another emissary, says that even if sex was offered, a disciple can always turn down a sexual advance, even though there's quoted witness statements that say that that is not true. Both Petzold and Doltz say that they owe him everything. There's your first indication. The loose collection of followers, many tied to Oahu's yoga and health food communities, isn't organized enough to qualify as a group, they insist. Again, insert eye roll here. Allen and his friends, Goldstein and Johnston, argue that they were never interested in their guru sexually to begin with. They were all so much younger than Gomez, and they say he groomed them, which he absolutely did. He turned them into his concubines. He was a creature of habit, and they say that there was a day reserved for each of them. Allen was Thursdays, Goldstein was Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Johnston, who has always been straight, always ended up drawing Mondays. They had been taught how to bow in submission as a way to connect with God, and that was how the guru groomed them. Submission should never be considered or confused with consent. And I need to repeat that just so that it is clear for the ones in the back. Submission should not ever be confused as consent. How can you consent to somebody who holds power over you, right? Somebody that you think holds the key to your spiritual alignment. Johnston asks, quote, "How can you equate that to consent when the imbalance of power is so great?" End quote. I'm going to shamelessly plug one more time. This documentary is so worth the watch. And like I said, it's on Amazon Prime. So it's free. Now, the current status of the cult is reported to still be running. They are still in Hawaii, and he is operating under the name Reiji, which means God King. He teaches yoga on the beach and maintains a community around him. And just before the release of the Holy Hell documentary, Gomez moved into a bigger, more secure home, and we're calling that the fortress, I guess. That's what Will Allen refers to it as. Gomez was also featured on episode 3 of season 1 of Netflix's How to Become a Cult Leader. People in the Buddhafield Cult didn't live in walled compounds or cut themselves off from the outside world. They rented houses and apartments which they shared with other members of their circle and their friends. They had day jobs, but there were no children and no pets. It's easy to understand how anyone could be seduced into joining the Buddhafield Cult. Many followers came from privileged backgrounds, which leads me to wonder whether the search for enlightenment is a first world phenomenon. Are people who work 3 jobs to make ends meet too busy to worry about themselves? Many in the group seem to have lapsed from Catholicism, and a handful of others were Bible Belt Protestants. With its positive message and promise of unconditional love, the Buddhafield holds a special appeal to people seeking an alternative to all of the guilt and the fire and the brimstone that religion comes with. These people are not flakes, though. They are far from it. Many graduated college and were looking ahead to promising careers. They just had really big questions. They wondered why they were here, what was the point, what were they missing? And that's when they fell victim. They were vulnerable and they fell victim to a man who just wanted to be famous. So, as you can see, this is kind of the base of the Stanley cover. I don't think I'm going to go all the way down on this one. I kind of like the shortness of it, and it just goes around the cup. I do need to weave it in, so y'all know I hate doing that. Anyway, like I said, there will be a link to a Google Doc that kind of explains exactly how I did that, even though it's very simple. And yeah, so next week, we're going to dive into another case. And as always, I will have a free crochet pattern to go with it. I think I'm going to do shorts next week, y'all, which is super fun. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media. Murder She Crocheted on Facebook, at MSC Pod on Twitter or X, Murder She Crocheted on TikTok and Instagram. We also have a Pinterest board where I link all of the free patterns that I can find on Pinterest. And I have a few other ones in there that are just fun. If you have case suggestions or a listener story or pattern suggestions or just want to say hi, shoot me an email at murdershecricheted@gmail.com. I want to hear from you, or DM me on any of those platforms. I want to hear from you guys. I want to see what you're doing. I want to be inspired by you guys. This podcast is a safe spot for all of us, right? And I want to bring you guys into the fold as much as possible. So, with all of that and my rambling being said, until next time, stay crafty and stay creepy.